My name is Esther Robinson. On my 20th birthday, my parents and my sister Sylvia, who has always been their picture-perfect golden child, gave me a gift I would never forget. It was the kind of gift that still jolts me awake at night from the shock of it. They didn't just disown me. They orchestrated a spectacle meticulously planned, with relatives and friends as witnesses to sever me from both the family and the family fortune with the precision of a seasoned surgeon wielding a scalpel. None of my academic trophies were on display. Instead, Sylvia's participation ribbons lined the shelves proudly in that vast dining room. But to understand the infamy of that birthday dinner, you'd have to go back years, no, 2 whole decades. The signs were everywhere. Now, they seem painfully obvious. But back then, I couldn't see any of it. A week before my 20th birthday, my parents called me together. "Esther, honey," my mother began with a syrupy voice coated in fake warmth. "Your 20th birthday is going to be really special. You absolutely must come home. There's a surprise waiting." "That's right, Esther," my father chimed in. "It won't just be a family celebration. We've got something important to talk to you about. Something for your future. So let's have a family dinner on Saturday. Sylvia will be there. We've invited some relatives and friends, too." "Why are you making such a big deal out of it?" I asked, feeling suspicious. Do parents need a reason to celebrate their daughter's birthday? My mother laughed awkwardly. "Be there at exactly 6, and wear that dress we gave you last Christmas, Esther. The blue one." That conservative and expensive dress made me look like a high school girl pretending to be some rich man's daughter. I hated it. An unease bubbled up from my chest, but I shoved it down, forcing myself to interpret it as excitement for their so-called surprise and important talk. I foolishly believed they were going to seriously and positively discuss my future. On the morning of my birthday, I put on that wretched blue dress in my room. The fabric felt heavier than I remembered. It was as if every thread carried the weight of expectations I could never fulfill. At 5:45 p.m., I arrived at my parents' home and parked my worn-out Honda gently between Sylvia's Audi and Aunt Virginia's Mercedes. The house was buzzing with the energy of gathered relatives. Inside, the dining room table was set with the finest Wedgwood china, genuine silverware, and crystal champagne flutes catching the late afternoon light. All of it was reserved for only the most formal occasions. Something was definitely wrong. Sylvia came to me and kissed my cheek. She was wearing a dazzling red dress unlike anything I had ever seen her in, and her perfume struck sharply at my nose like an expensive engagement ring, bold, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. "Happy birthday, Esther. You'll never forget tonight," she whispered. The way she said it sent ice rushing through my veins. Guests arrived in a steady stream. Uncle Solomon and Aunt Virginia, my cousin Trevor and his new wife, the women from my mother's bridge club, and my father's golf buddies with Rolex watches and deep disdain for anything too progressive. Everyone looked at me. Not with the familiar mix of pity and mild disapproval I'd grown used to, but with something else. Something that felt like goodbye. At exactly 6 o'clock, my mother tapped her champagne glass. The room fell instantly silent. "Thank you all for joining us for Esther's 20th birthday," she began. Her smile was flawless and terrifying. "As many of you may know, this past year has been one of clarity for our family." My father rose and joined her at the head of the table. I sat frozen in my seat. Sylvia kept touching my arm, as if afraid I might bolt. Julianne and I have spent much time crafting our estate plans, my father announced in his boardroom voice that always made me feel small. We've made a promise to communicate our intentions transparently with our children about their futures. My heart began to pound. We have reached a formal decision on the distribution of our estate, my mother continued. Her gray eyes locked onto mine with clinical precision. Taking into careful account their sense of responsibility, potential for financial independence, and alignment with family values, we have made our decision. Sylvia has shown exceptional maturity, my father said, turning toward my sister. Her recent engagement to Marvin is just one example. Ah, yes, he completed his MBA at Harvard and now works at Goldman Sachs. Sylvia has a very pragmatic and grounded approach to building generational wealth. He paused, letting the unspoken contrast with my penniless art student boyfriend hang in the air. Sylvia will inherit the primary residence, the Lake Champlain summer home, and 75% of our liquid assets and investment portfolio. Polite applause followed. Sylvia's face gleamed with genuine delight, not just satisfaction, but pure triumph. I felt numb, as though watching the whole scene through thick glass. As for Esther, my mother continued, her voice softening with what she likely thought passed for sympathy. We intend to establish a modest educational trust. This will enable Esther to complete her degree and, if she chooses, pursue graduate studies. This is contingent, of course, on maintaining a certain GPA, meeting regularly with our financial advisor, and discussing her academic progress. More polite applause. The remaining 25%, my father added, will be held in a secondary trust. Esther will gain access to those funds at age 30, but only if certain conditions are met. These include completing a graduate education, securing a stable career in a financially realistic field, and marrying an appropriate partner approved by our financial advisor. This arrangement, my mother concluded, raising her glass, ensures that our family's legacy will be preserved through the child best suited to uphold our standards and values. To Sylvia. To Sylvia. The room echoed, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses rang out like a bell toll my own bell. It felt like a quiet funeral chime. Relatives offered Sylvia their congratulations and gave me what they probably thought were words of encouragement. You're lucky to have parents supporting your education. You'll understand once you've matured a bit more. Then my father let out the cold, dismissive laugh he always reserved for people he considered beneath him. We expected too much, he said. We hoped you would become someone of value. This is just a formal acknowledgement of something we've known for years. At that moment, I understood completely. I wasn't their daughter. I was just a problem, a charity case. I don't know how much time passed. It felt like forever. I rose from my seat and walked to the restroom silently. In the mirror, I saw myself in that blue dress. But it wasn't the same girl anymore. It wasn't the wounded daughter. It was someone who had made up her mind. I returned to the dining room. No one else was there yet, but my parents entered soon after. My mother held out a document. Sign this, she said evenly. All the legal work is done. This is just a formality. I took the document and read it. It officially removed me from any inheritance and included clauses waiving all rights to contest. With every paragraph, I felt lighter. It was finally ending. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Now I see who you really are. I've wasted years begging for love that was never coming. I'm done." I took the Mont Blanc pen my father offered and signed the document. I placed the document back on the table, picked up my bag, and walked away, steadying my steps. "Where are you going?" my mother snapped. "The party's not over." Without turning around, I answered, "It is for me. It was actually over a long time ago, you just didn't say it out loud." And I left the room. There was one thing no one had managed to take from me: a quiet, unshakable dignity. At a quiet cafe 3 blocks away, reality finally hit. My hands trembled as I ordered coffee, and a dull ache began to bloom deep in my heart. My phone buzzed again and again. Message after message popped up from my family. "Stop being so dramatic. Your reaction only proves we made the right decision. So emotional, as always. You should be grateful. You're always so selfish. Classic Esther." I was raised in a wealthy family, but my parents were conservative people who valued appearances, financial success, and social standing above all else. They viewed social contribution and creativity as troublesome distractions. My sister Sylvia was their ideal daughter, the one who bore the full weight of their expectations. 3 years older than me, she had a talent for sensing exactly what our parents wanted to hear and saying it flawlessly. From as early as I can remember, power dynamics within our family were governed by an inexplicable favoritism. My straighter report cards were met with a flat, "Oh, that's nice," while Sylvia's C- earned her praise and rewards. My academic certificates and science medals decorated the walls of my bedroom, but our parents heaped compliments on Sylvia's mediocre watercolor paintings. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" was my mother's refrain. The fracture became irreparable when I was 12. Inspired by a school project, I suggested implementing a recycling program at home. My mother snapped, "That's what the housekeeper is for." My father dismissed the idea as dangerous socialism. I'll never forget my 10th birthday, the same day I won first place at the state science fair. My parents were visibly irritated. Mom said, "Sylvia has dance rehearsal at 4. That's what matters for her future," and left the venue early. Dad warned me, "Don't get too full of yourself with this science stuff. The world doesn't reward people who think they're smarter than everyone else." That night, both my birthday and my victory were ignored in favor of a lavish party for Sylvia. Achievement, I learned early on, was not something to be celebrated, it was something to be punished for. At 15, I organized a fundraiser for underprivileged students. My father tore up the check and said, "We don't associate with people like that." In high school, I led climate action rallies and devoted myself to volunteer work. My parents genuinely asked, "Can't you find a hobby that doesn't attract such weird people?" The economic disparity was just as stark. Sylvia was given a brand new luxury car at 16. I walked or took the bus. She wore designer clothes. Mine were from clearance racks. Her allowance was generous. I worked at the library to afford basic living expenses. When I received a scholarship to a state university's architecture program, my parents were visibly disappointed I hadn't chosen a more prestigious institution. What mattered to them wasn't how my choices helped me, it was how those choices looked to others. College was the first place that taught me real independence and freedom. I double majored in architecture and environmental science, studying in defiance of my upbringing. My parents called it an unnecessary luxury and refused to help with tuition. I juggled multiple jobs and maintained near-perfect grades, but the distance between us only grew. What changed the course of my life was meeting Raul. He was majoring in graphic design, came from a working-class family, and understood my pain in a way no one else had. When I brought Raul home for Thanksgiving, we were met with blatant classism. My mother repeatedly got his last name wrong. My father didn't show the slightest interest until learning Raul's father worked in construction. After dinner, Sylvia confronted me. "Seriously, Esther? A penniless art student? Do you think Mom and Dad are going to like him once it's time to talk about inheritance?" The word inheritance was never spoken directly. But it was always in the air, a silent, invisible force that shaped the dynamic between me and my sister. To my parents, Raul was the embodiment of everything they feared I might become. Someone who valued creativity and cared about social justice. "He's going to turn you into one of those people," my mother warned. That was when I fully understood. My talents were only acknowledged if they produced what my parents considered success, status, appearances, and financial return. About 6 months before my 20th birthday, things began to shift noticeably. Calls from my parents became solely about my grades. Sylvia started coming home every weekend, always emerging from Dad's study looking smug and satisfied. During a holiday visit, I overheard whispers. "She cares more about saving the world than building wealth. At least Sylvia has a sensible attitude toward money. We need to realistically consider who should manage the family legacy." 1 month before my birthday, I broke up with Raul. I was almost relieved by how sympathetic my parents acted. "College relationships rarely last," my mother said gently. "Once you're more settled in society, you'll find someone more suitable." Suitable? That word echoed the quiet anxiety that had always lived deep in my chest. Memories began to surge, one after another, and my hand trembled as I held my coffee cup. The first cup had long gone cold. I ordered a second. By the time I finished it, the ringing of incoming calls had stopped, but the flood of messages on my screen reminded me just how ruthless they could be. Yet, by the third cup of coffee, the shock and numbness began to shift. It wasn't despair. It was a sharp resolve, cold, strategic clarity. The most powerful weapon my family had ever used against me, granting and withholding their approval, no longer had any hold. My parents believed they were in complete control. But I knew better. During a break from college, I had stumbled upon financial documents revealing that my parents were still dependent on monthly transfers from my grandfather, Alfred. I'd also overheard conversations about transactions that, if exposed, could seriously damage the family's reputation. Most importantly, I had kept in direct contact with my grandfather without going through them. That trust between us remained intact and undisturbed. With a steadier hand than I expected, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my grandfather, Alfred. I told him, in detail, everything that had happened on my birthday night. "They did that to you?" His voice, usually calm and composed, was trembling with fury. "That's enough, Esther. Come to my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Bring all the documents. I will stop their monthly allowance immediately. They won't get away with this any longer. The next call I made was to Santos, the family's legal advisor and the same man who had privately warned me 2 years ago about my parents' reckless financial management. I can't say I'm surprised, he replied in a calm voice. Your parents' decisions have been increasingly erratic lately. In fact, I've noticed some signs of misconduct. This situation might be the perfect opportunity to bring them into the open. Alfred, my grandfather, was a man who had built generational wealth through discipline and effort. He had strong convictions and never tolerated easy compromise. When I arrived at his office, he was already in the middle of a meeting with his financial analyst and personal attorney. "Show me everything," he said without hesitation. I spent 2 hours laying out each piece of the evidence I had gathered. His expression gradually darkened, and a quiet anger began to rise. "This isn't just a lapse in judgment," he said firmly. "This is organized abuse masquerading as parental responsibility." My grandfather admitted that my parents were financially dependent on him. "I've been supporting them for 30 years. The house, the cars, the vacations, even Sylvia's tuition, everything has been covered by my monthly transfers. And yet, they haven't saved a single cent responsibly." Then and there, he made 3 decisive calls. First, he contacted the bank to immediately freeze all financial support to my parents and Sylvia. Next, he instructed his attorney who was present to begin a full revision of his estate plans. Finally, he phoned the property management company to terminate the lease on the downtown office space my parents had been using. "They need to understand that actions have consequences," he said firmly. "Financial support is a responsibility, not an entitlement." After that, my grandfather revealed how my parents had systematically sabotaged my relationship with him using false information. "They were threatened by your talent," he said, his voice now gentler. "You remind me of myself when I was young. Sharp, decisive, analytical. They knew you would earn my respect naturally. And that's something they could never attain." Hearing those words for the first time, I felt what it was like to be truly supported by someone. Then, my grandfather laid out a path to financial independence. "I'll cover all your education costs. But everything else you will build yourself, on your own terms." That's what a real inheritance means. It's not about receiving wealth. It's about being given the chance to create something valuable within your own life. Within a few hours, messages from my parents began to flood in. The sudden wave of panic in their words showed just how immediate the impact of those decisions had been. The world my parents had so carefully built began to crumble with a loud crash. The beach house was sold far below market value. The luxury cars disappeared. They even gave up their club memberships. About 3 months after my birthday, I got a call from Sylvia. She was screaming hysterically, her voice accusatory. "You ruined us? I don't know what you told Grandpa, but we're about to lose everything. Creditors call us every day. We sold the jewelry, the artwork, there's nothing left." She was desperate. "Please talk to Grandpa. He'll listen to you." I stayed silent for a moment, then quietly asked, "And where were you when I spent 20 years just wanting to be loved?" That was all I said before I hung up. 5 months after my birthday, my parents finally attempted reconciliation. One day, my father came to my studio, looking exhausted. Maybe we made a hasty decision about the inheritance, he said. I replied in a calm voice, that was your choice, not mine. An apology won't change the past, and I'm not looking back. He had no response. He turned and walked away with slumped shoulders. My mother also showed up at my apartment. Her voice was heavy with emotion. I'm still your mother. I cut her off. You never did anything for me. You lived off Grandpa's money. What you truly gave up was integrity. When I asked why she had rejected me so harshly, she murmured, barely audible. You reminded me too much of him. You were independent, smart. You made me feel powerless. Sylvia needed me. You never did. Her confession only confirmed what I had always suspected. While she stood frozen, I opened the door and said one last thing. By the way, I adopted a dog from the shelter you voted to shut down last year. His name is Rocky. Then I quietly closed the door. A few weeks later, I received a direct call from Santos, the attorney. There's something I need to inform you of, he began cautiously. While assisting with Alfred's estate, I uncovered something deeply concerning. His words left me speechless. It turned out that my late grandmother had set up a special trust for her grandchildren's education. The trust included explicit instructions to prioritize fields like architecture and engineering. It was exactly my area of study. They were funds meant to support my future. But my parents had deliberately kept its existence from me. Worse, they had diverted portions of it to fund Sylvia's so-called educational experiences. For example, labeling a fashion tour across Europe as art education. The documentation was cleverly constructed. You've been wrongfully denied access to education funds that were meant for you, Santos explained softly. Your grandfather had no idea until I brought it to his attention. When Grandpa received the report, he was furious. He immediately instructed Santos to pursue full recovery of the funds misappropriated by my parents and to begin legal procedures that would grant me direct and sole access to the remaining assets of the trust. Of course, the financial matter was important. But what mattered even more to me was that, for the first time, there was documented proof that my parents' years of obstruction hadn't been accidental or misunderstood, but deliberate, calculated suppression. I thought I would go mad in rage, but instead, I was filled with a profound sense of calm. This discovery erased the lingering doubt that maybe I had just been too sensitive all along. Their behavior wasn't random cruelty. It had always been a strategy to keep me down. And I realized how utterly pointless it had been to blame myself all those years. I had never been wrong. I had never deserved the pain. One day, I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment. A cold wind brushed against my face when a message arrived from an unknown number. I'm sleeping in my car now. Please, Esther. It was from Sylvia. Without hesitation, I blocked the number. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was a boundary. They were now facing the consequences of their own choices, the years of selfishness, the stolen trust funds, and the collapse of their public image. They had brought it all upon themselves. I focused on architecture. Eco-conscious housing design was beginning to gain attention. By then, I had also begun living with Rocky. He was a 3-legged rescue dog I had adopted from the shelter my mother had voted to shut down. The courage with which he lived inspired me constantly. His ability to embrace the present without clinging to the past showed me that no matter how wounded we are, we can move forward. Rocky didn't teach me through words but through his very presence. My bond with Grandpa deepened. We had become a real family, one where we genuinely cherished each other. Then one day, at a fundraiser for the animal shelter, I saw Raoul again. He, too, had moved forward. Our reconnection through shared work quietly grew into trust and warmth, and we began to talk about building affordable eco-homes together. I graduated from my master's program at the top of my class. The trust, now fully under my control, not only covered my graduate tuition, but also provided scholarships for other students. What had once been a financial wound became a gift to the community. A housing project I had designed had entered the construction phase, on its way to becoming a place where people could truly live. Watching the blueprints turn into reality gave me a sense of accomplishment no monetary inheritance ever could. There are no family photos in my apartment. When visitors ask why, I just smile and say, families are complicated. The moment they cut me off from their inheritance, I gained my freedom. Being financially disowned awakened the true legacy within me: resilience, integrity, and the power to create. Tonight, as I review my thesis and watch Rocky sleeping quietly at my feet, I think to myself, when they rejected me, they gave me the chance to choose myself.